When I was in high school, history was not one of the subjects that was on my radar. I was not interested and was not inspired by the attempts of my history teacher. I looked at our trip to the battlefields and the cemeteries as an opportunity to finally learn a bit of history that I missed out on during my teenage years. I was moved by my experiences at Dieppe, Ypres, Vimy, Pegasus Bridge, and Normandy, but I was deeply moved by my trip to Westerbork. Westerbork, located in northeastern Netherlands, was a World War II refugee camp to house mainly Jewish refugees who were trying to escape Nazi terror in their homeland. During World War II, the Nazis took over the camp and turned it into a deportation camp. This memorial symbolizes the terrible fate the concentration camp victims experienced every Tuesday as a cargo train left Westerbork for concentration camps. In the period from 1942 to 1945, a total of 170,000 people passed through the camp on a total of 93 outgoing trains. Some were under the impression that they were going to a better life. The only watchtower in this bunker visible today represents the oppressive and uncompromising way the refugees were treated by the Nazis. Each stone that is part of this monument at Westerbork represents a single person that stayed at Westerbork and died in a Nazi concentration camp. Very little is left of the actual camp itself, but the Visitors Center Museum provides information on the daily life in the camp. Westerbork went into operation on July the 1st, 1942. From that moment onwards, all Jews in the Netherlands had to report for transport to Westerbork. The leaders of the Jewish community were forced to cooperate. The travelers were allowed to bring luggage, one suitcase or backpack with stipulated clothing and other items. Sometimes larger groups of people were picked up during raids and subsequently transported to Westerbork. Not everyone reported for transport. Tens of thousands of Jews went into hiding, and some joined the resistance movement. Many of you have heard of the diary of Anne Frank. Anne Frank and her family passed through Westerbork. Anne and her sister Margot were transferred to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp and both died of typhus. In the camp, Jews went through registration and their valuables and money were taken away. A few survived once they left Westerbork. But 102,000 times, a mother, a father, a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister, a grandfather, a grandmother, an uncle, an aunt, a nephew, a niece, a friend was murdered.
In August, John and Jan and Beth and I participated in a tour with the Essex and Kent Scottish Regiment, and for 18 days we visited significant sites in France, Belgium, Germany, and Holland, where Canadian forces fought with their allies during the First and Second World Wars. Today, we would like to share our experiences and hopefully show you why Canadians have gained so much respect and love by the people in Western Europe. Each of us has selected parts of the tour that had a very special meaning to us. I would like to talk about Normandy and Dieppe. It was an emotional roller coaster. Seeing what life is like today and what it was like 70 years ago. I created a 10-minute video which I hope conveys the contradictions between two very different times. The video switches back between June 1944 and August 2012. It's hard to believe all the death and destruction that occurred in homes, farms, and in their streets. Unlike our soldiers who traveled thousands of miles to fight, the people in France lived, died, and suffered at home with unbelievable hardships. Now the battles are over. There is peace. God willing, there'll be everlasting peace. During the video, you saw what appeared to be small islands off the beaches of Normandy. In fact, it was what was left of a harbor that was built by the British to allow all forces to land safely and move inland. We learned at Dieppe in 1942 that all harbors along the European coast were heavily fortified. So the decision was made by Winston Churchill, Britain's Prime Minister, to find a quieter beach area without a harbor and to build one. Think of it. Normandy was a bit like Colchester without a natural harbor. Here's the description of the construction that they built. An artificial harbor in Dover, England, had taken 7 years to build in peacetime. The harbor at Normandy was constructed in 2 weeks during a battle. and it was even bigger. It was probably twice as big as the one in Dover. In the summer of 1943, 40,000 men were hired to construct large concrete barges. These would eventually be floated across the English Channel and sunk, forming an outer breakwall and creating a sheltered harbor about 2 kilometers out to sea and 5 kilometers wide after the initial invasion on June 6, 1944. Most barges were positioned about 5 miles off the coast. 2 days after the invasion began, they were moved into position and sunk. The Royal Engineers built a complete harbor out of 600,000 tons of concrete between 33 jetties and had 10 miles of floating roadways to land men and vehicles on the beach. In the 10 months that followed, it was used to land over 2.5 million men, 500,000 vehicles, and 4 million tons of supplies, providing much-needed reinforcements in France. Part of the reason this story is especially important to Janet, because her father served on a minesweeper off the coast of Normandy for several days before the Allied offensive to ensure the initial invasion and the building of the harbor would be successful. Once again, the troops and equipment had to move quickly inland. Germans were flooding the land, blowing up bridges, and as they began their slow retreat. Perhaps at another time, I can share with you the story of the Pegasus Bridge, which allowed our troops to successfully advance. And finally, the picture behind me is of the Canadian War Memorial, The Brooding Soldier, at Vancouver Corner in Belgium, near Ypres, built in 1923. The plaque on the memorial reads, "This column marks the battlefield where 18,000 Canadians withstood the first German gas attacks, April 22nd to 25th, 1915. 2,000 fell and are found buried nearby." It's something for us to remember, lest we forget.